Hello and welcome to Stoke Mandeville Plastics,
where we explore the cutting edge of reconstructive surgery. My name is Rebecca Shirley.
And I'm James KK Chan.
Our guest today is one of the most venerated names in surgery. He is Irish, worked in Dublin, moved to Canada, and ended up in the United States.
You know him as the editor of the biggest plastic surgery textbook in the world, and he has also been pioneer in the field of reconstructive microsurgery.
His name is Peter Neligan. Good evening. Good afternoon, rather.
Hi.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And you retired last year, is that correct?
I retired. We retired. My wife and I retired in January 2021.
Right. Congratulations.
Part of the reason was COVID, because it was no longer fun working in COVID. All the traveling had stopped, and also hospital got an electronic medical record system that's totally crap. And my wife, who's a radiation oncologist, she said she just turned 70, and she said, "Okay, I'm not doing this shit. We're quitting. At least I'm quitting. You can do what you like." So I decided to quit as well.
Right. Well, you're still very active on the educational circuit.
Yeah, it's hard to get out of it.
Where are you spending your retirement? Are you still in the US or?
In the US. So we divide our time between Phoenix in Arizona and Toronto. Our kids and grandkids are in Toronto, so we have a place there as well.
I'm wondering, do you miss your work, and how have you adjusted to stopping, and what are you doing now?
No, that's the amazing thing. I thought I would miss it, but I don't miss it at all, not even a little bit, the surgery part. And it was kind of brought home to me, early on in the year I retired, when I was sort of figuring out, should I quit or not. I was doing a facial reanimation case, and the registrar, the resident and the fellow came into the room as the patient was being brought in and said, "I'm really excited about this case. Aren't you excited, Dr. Neligan?" I thought, no. And so I thought, that's probably a good sign that it's time to quit. And so, like I said, I've got 4 books going at the moment, and I'm doing a lot of webinars and stuff like that. And that's kind of a nice transition. But for example, my wife and I go for a walk. We walk 4 or 5 miles every day. I'm reading lots of books, playing lots of music, and then sort of working in between. So it's fun. So no, I don't miss it at all.
Book?
Do I have a favorite book? No, I don't have a favorite book, but I read all sorts of books, like fiction and nonfiction. But one of the things that I found this summer after I got COVID was really interesting. I couldn't read a book, and eventually I was able to read, and even still I'm just able to read rubbish, whodunit books. I haven't been able to read anything serious. And actually editing chapters and stuff like that since COVID, which was in June, has been really tough. It takes a lot of concentration that never cost me a thought before, but does now. But it's getting better. So I think it's just a brain fog from COVID.
I mean, when you were practicing, were you able to read non-plastic surgery stuff?
Oh,
Did you
yeah.
have time?
Yeah.
Really? You're not at the hospital anymore, but you're still busy. You're doing the new edition of your textbook.
I've got 4 books going at the moment. The new edition is almost done. It'll be published next year.
Yeah.
And so we're just at the stage. Pretty well all the chapters are in and being produced, and then the next stage will be the galley proofs, and then what's called the scatter proofs, which is where they send me all the pictures, every single picture in the books. color and size and appropriate cropping and placement and stuff like that. So that takes a couple of months.
Wow. Well, I've submitted my chapter.
Math, that's right. Thank you.
So
right now.
No, thank you. It was hard work, and that was one of, I don't know how many chapters you have altogether.
Yeah, there's about 250 or something.
Oh goodness.
Yeah.
Look, related to that, what is it like to be? I mean, your name is synonymous with the textbook.
Right.
What is it known to be known as Mr. Textbook?
It's weird because it was never my intention.
Okay.
I think I probably told you the story of how I ended up being editor of that.
No.
It must have been 2006, 2007. I got an email from Elsevier saying that we want to republish this book because it had been several years since it was published, and Steve Mathis, who was the previous editor, had died. And so they said, we're looking for a new editor, and could you send us the names of people you think would be appropriate editors? Mm-hmm. So I sent them an email back with a bunch of names. And then a month or two later, I got another email from them saying, thank you for your email. And we've got a short list of potential editors, and you're on the list. Could we come out to Seattle and talk to you? And so, sure, I told them sure. And so the Elsevier editor came out to Seattle, and we just chatted, and she just asked me what I wanted to do with if I was editor, what I would want to do with the book. And so I said that, number one, I'd want complete control. Number two, I'd want all the superfluous stuff that was in the previous volumes cut out. There's a lot of duplication. I'd want everything in color, and a couple of other things. And so she thanked me very much. And then about a month later, I got an email saying, it was great to meet you. We would like you to be the editor of the new edition. Could we send you a contract? And that's how it started.
Right.
Yeah. And then Elsevier wanted to have a new edition every 5 years, which I thought was probably too soon, but that's what they wanted because it's their biggest publication, basically their biggest moneymaker. And so that's why it's come out every 5 years. And then this current one is 6 years because I eventually said to them, 5 years is crazy, let's do 6, and they agreed. So.
Yeah. I mean, the breadth of the textbook is breathtaking. I wondered if you were a young attending plastic surgeon now, what field would grab you?
I don't know, but probably the one that ended up grabbing me, probably microsurgery.
Mm.
But who knows?
Yeah.
We wanted to ask, so we've been doing this webinar series now for a couple of years. In fact, you were one of our first guests, and that was almost exactly 2 years ago.
Which is amazing.
And we're interested to know if you were, the recent idea is to do interviews with different plastic surgeons. Is there a particular plastic surgeon you would like to interview or you would have liked to interview for a series like this?
I would have liked to interview Ralph Millard and probably Paul Tessier. I met Tessier, but at the time I think I was a registrar, I doubt he would have talked to me at that time.
What would you like to have heard from them?
Probably the guy who amazed me most was Tessier, because his first Tessier devised this procedure for hypertelorbitism that was intracranial and extracranial, which was totally taboo. I mean, you couldn't do that according to surgical dictum at the time. And I think the first 2 patients that he operated on died. And he went ahead with, he had the courage of his conviction, and he continued to work on it until he got it. And that to me was amazing, how you could work through that. Because even losing a flap is devastating, let alone losing a patient. I don't know how I would even cope with that, particularly doing something that was unorthodox and new. So that blew my mind. So that's that. I would probably like to interview him most of all.
Peter, you yourself, you've been a pioneer in reconstructive microsurgery, and I wonder, you must have come across a lot of naysayers, and similar to Tessier.
Oh, absolutely.
How did you cope with that? What were the challenges, and what were the things that kept you going?
I think number one, you need an element of cowboy in you. You need to be a bit of a cowboy, and I think you need to turn a deaf ear to, as long as you're happy that what you've done is reasonable in your own mind, you need to turn a deaf ear to the criticism, because otherwise you're never going to advance. And I think that's the difficulty. I think you need cowboys, and I think you also need critiques, people who criticize cowboys, because then you reach a balance. And I mean, Tessier was obviously a cowboy. Like, he did things that nobody had ever done before. But he was also a brilliant technician. And I mean, his advancement led to not just the birth of craniofacial surgery, but it led to advancements in so many other specialties like neurosurgery and ophthalmic surgery, and you name it. I mean, most of the things we do today couldn't have been done without somebody like Tessier leading the way.
So what about as a cowboy, and you identified that you have elements of cowboy in you, you also do need some kind of support network or mentor, or maybe somebody even who's going to disagree with what your views are, but that you can talk to about your thoughts to clarify what you should and perhaps shouldn't try?
Absolutely. I mean, I've had some great mentors. Probably my biggest mentor was Ian Jackson. And Ian was a cowboy, but he was also an amazing surgeon, and a very thoughtful surgeon. And I think that's part of the deal is trying something new, but basing it on very sound scientific knowledge and evidence of stuff that's gone before, and not doing stuff. I mean, doing stuff that may be completely off the wall to some people, but to other people is not really that far off the wall. It's just a reasonable way to advance. And so I would phone Jackson and run things by him, and he would run things by me, and we had a great relationship. I first got to know him when he was in his late 50s. I was in my early 40s. Like, he was already a huge name. I was nobody. And he just treated me right away as an equal, which was amazing. The other person that did that was Harry Bunke. I met him when I was a fellow, and I was at a micro meeting in Japan, and we happened to be staying at the same hotel. And there was a walk from the hotel to the conference center. And I walked with him I just happened to walk with him the first day. I knew who he was. He obviously had no idea who I was. But then for the rest of the 3 or 4 days of the meeting, he would wait for me and seek me out. So we walked back together. And on the plane on the way back to the States, he was in the front of the bus. I was in the back of the bus. And every now and again, he came back with a glass of whiskey and saying, "Hey, Irishman, here's a glass of whiskey for you." And he was an amazing guy too, and he was another cowboy. So all of these innovators have had cowboy in them, but they've also been amazing surgeons, and they haven't just done something off the wall and continued. They've done something off the wall and then sort of figured out why it worked and how they could make it better, and then gradually got integrated into mainstream.
Can you see the future? What's the next kind of big advance in the next 10 years, do you think? Is it lymphedema surgery? Is it something else?
Lymphedema surgery is part of it, but I think lymphedema surgery is just opening up a new horizon for us, and that new horizon is super microsurgery and robotics. Mm-hmm. I think that's where a lot of the future is, certainly in microsurgery. I think the other thing to remember is that we're not an island, so there are innovations going on in other specialties as well. Mm-hmm. And I always used to tell my residents, we've been doing a tumor case and cutting this cancer out, and I would say to the residents, and maybe in your lifetime you'll be telling your residents that you used to cut these things out, and they'll laugh at you, because I think that's the way it's going. We're seeing that now with targeted therapy, where tumors are being very specifically targeted, and the outcomes are getting better. And the hugely invasive surgery that used to be done 50 years ago is no longer being done. I mean, if you look at head and neck, robotic surgery is part of head and neck now, and endoscopic surgery, and the same is true all over the surgical spectrum. And all of these things are changing, and I think they'll change for plastic surgery as well. Mm-hmm. We're already starting to see it.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite operation?
No. I love all surgery. I hate repetition. I hate doing the same surgery over and over again. Mm. And one of the things I like about plastic surgery is that, everything is different, and you do something different each time. Or you do a case that nobody's ever done before, or you have to figure out a flap because there's a tattoo in the area of the flap that you wanted to use, and you have to use another flap. Mm-hmm. In fact, the very last case that I did in practice was a woman with a peripheral nerve sheath tumor on her forehead, and she had neurofibromatosis. And so I needed a thin flap for her forehead. So I thought, okay, well, a skip flap would be perfect. But she had these huge nests of neurofibromatosis in both of her groins. Mm. So I thought, okay, well, how about just a radial forearm flap? And so both her forearms were tattooed. So I couldn't put a tattoo on her forehead. I thought, okay, let's go with dorsalis pedis. It's a nice thin flap. But both of her feet were tattooed. So I thought, okay, well, let's do a really thin ALT flap. But both of her thighs were tattooed. So we ended up doing an extended lateral arm flap because she had a tattoo in her arm. She had a tattoo in her forearm, but there was a little bit around her elbow where there was no tattoo. And she wouldn't let me touch the tattoo up here, which was a big round tattoo. So I had to make my incision around and lift up the flap. And that tattoo said, "I just fucking said that 3 times." So that's what I love about plastic surgery is, I could have put a tattoo on her forehead, but it was kind of fun figuring out how you could do the case without putting a tattoo on her forehead.
Yeah.
And she was the sort of woman, she would have freaked if I put a tattoo on her forehead. Mm.
So tell us, what was a typical day for you like when you were working, when you were most busy? You're an early riser, aren't you?
Yeah, I get up early, and I generally would go for a run in the morning around maybe 5 o'clock, run for an hour, and then come home, shower, get into the hospital, be in the hospital by about 6:30 or so. And usually, you know, any meetings and stuff that went on at that time, or otherwise, if there were no meetings, then I'd do some, you know, catching up with emails and, you know, any chapters I had going or papers or whatever. And then the day would start with the Aurora started at 7:30. And one of the reasons I moved from Canada to the US was that in Canada, the Auroras finished at 3:30. I had a long day every week. I had 2 Aurora days. I had one long day, and the long day I could book a free flap, but on the other day I couldn't. And the Aurora finished at 3:30, and not infrequently, the nurse in charge would come into your room at maybe noon and say, we're canceling your last case because it's going to go beyond 3:30. And then I went to the States, and one evening I was operating, it was about 7:30 in the evening, and I had 2 more cases on my list. And the nurse in charge came in and said, you've got 2 more cases on your list. Do you have enough staff that if we open up another room or 2 that you could do those?
Wow. And
that was the difference. So there's no restriction on operating time and no restriction on, you know, if I saw a melanoma in my clinic my clinic was on Wednesday, I could do that case on Friday. So there was no difficulty getting stuff done. And that made a big difference. And then get back to my day, I would finish work, usually get home about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then we would generally have dinner, and then just either watch TV or do some work or whatever, get to bed at about, used to go to bed at about 12 or 1, and then up at 4 or 5, usually 4:30.
Wow.
Would you dream about operations, or would ideas about how to inset flaps or what operations to do come to you in dreams ever?
Not in dreams, but sometimes, like if I had a case like that one I told you about, the lady with all the tattoos, then I would certainly sort of think about all of that the night before or a couple of nights before, and sort of figure out what I could do. But I know I wouldn't dream about it.
So you still sleep 3 or 4 hours a night only now in retirement?
I go to bed earlier, but I usually get up at about 4:35.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the best time of day.
Yeah. You've had such a long, illustrious career. What was the thing that made you tick? You know, some people, once they've had an accomplishment or 2, they just kind of coast. But there's something in you that made you tick all the way along.
You know, it was the fun of it. I mean, I loved it all. It was all so much fun. One time, I have 2 kids, and each of them said to me when they were probably 14, 15, each of them said on different occasions, I'm never going to work the way you work, you're crazy. And then each of them again, maybe 10, 15 years later, when they were in the late 20s, maybe 30, they sort of said, I've figured you out. This is fun for you. This isn't work. And I said, yeah, that's right. And that's why I mean, I always said that I would keep working until it was no longer fun. And that's why I quit during COVID, because it was no longer fun, because you just went into work. You know, you couldn't go for coffee with anybody. You just went to the operating room, did your thing, went home. I'd go in scrubs. I'd operate, come home, take my scrubs off, get in the shower, and then do the same the next day. And also all traveling stopped. That's one of the things I enjoyed about my career, is that I used to travel between 3 and 4 months of the year. You know, a couple of days here and there, but I was on the road a lot, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so I got to know a lot of the plastic surgery community around the world, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So what's fun for you now?
Oh, what's fun for me now is getting these books finished is partly what's fun. Having time to do things like read lots of books, spend time with my kids and grandkids. That's a lot of fun. And I think part of what makes it fun is that I'm not missing surgery. It's not like it's a chore. It's still fun.
Yeah. Now, one of the fascinating things in your career is that you've moved to lots of different places, right? You've gone from Ireland to Toronto to Seattle. You've traveled around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about how that kind of diverse experience has shaped you?
I mean, first of all, it all happened by accident, really. I mean, even plastic surgery happened by accident.
Oh, right.
So when I was a medical student, I hated surgery. I had no clue what plastic surgery was. And then my wife and I were in the same class in medical school. And we were in the same teaching hospital in Dublin. And one day we got called into the office of the chairman of the board, who happened to be an ENT surgeon. And he said, it has come to the board's attention that you two are an item. And we said, yeah. He said, what are your plans? And we said, well, we're planning to get married at the end of medical school, between medical school and starting our internship. And he said, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but the board will not tolerate a married couple among its intern staff. So one of you will have to go. So we decided that it was probably, and he said, and we will help, whichever, you guys can decide who's going to go, and we'll help that person get an internship in one of the other hospitals in Dublin. And so we decided that it was probably safer for me to be the one to go, because for a female to get another internship may not be that easy. And so so I volunteered, and I spent the first 6 months in one of the teaching hospitals, which was very strong in cardiology. And at that time I thought, okay, I'm going to be an interventional cardiologist. And then the second 6, we had to do 6 months medicine, 6 months surgery. So for my surgical internship, I went to the one hospital in Dublin where the plastic surgery unit was. I had no idea what plastic surgery was. And because I was the new kid on the block, none of the guys who had trained in that hospital wanted to rotate through plastic surgery because it was the busiest service. And so, so I got the job of rotating through plastic surgery. And then 2 weeks in, that was it. My wife and I had always planned we were going to emigrate to New Zealand. Because at that time, we qualified in 1975. At that time, the New Zealand government had a very attractive tax incentive for physicians who wanted to relocate to New Zealand. And so we thought, okay, we'll go to New Zealand, we'll set up a family practice there. And then 2 weeks into my internship in plastic surgery in Dublin, we started looking at houses, and that was the end of New Zealand. And so, so that was Dublin. So then I did all of my training in Dublin, and the person who was immediately senior to me, this guy called Dennis Lawler, and he did a fellowship with Bernie O'Brien in Melbourne in microsurgery, and I knew that he and I were going to be working together, and so I thought, well, I shouldn't do a fellowship in Australia. I should do a fellowship in North America, and then come back and we can sort of put things together. And while he was away, while he was in Melbourne, the hospital had already bought a microscope and microsurgical instruments, because it was planned that when he came back that he would start a microsurgery service. And so every Tuesday, I would go to the maternity hospital and get a placenta, and I brought it back and I taught myself microsurgery, because all the stuff was there. And so I could spend the whole of Tuesday afternoon doing that. So that when Dennis came back, then I was able to work with him. And we were both registrars, and none of the consultants could do microsurgery. So we started the Irish replant service, and we got patients from all over the place for replants. Wow. And every time we get it, one or other of us would get a call saying there was a patient from Galway or something who cut a finger off. And I would call Dennis, or he would call me, and we'd arrange, which one of us would bring the 6-pack for the case, because we always had beer breaks in the middle of our micro cases. And then, Dennis came back. I had finished my training. There was no sign of a job for me or for Dennis. And so I applied to a bunch of places in North America for a fellowship. And I got 2 responses, 2 positive responses. I mean, I just wrote out of the blue. The 2 responses were Louisville, Kentucky, and Toronto. And Toronto just happened to be more convenient in terms of timing and everything. So I went to Toronto, and I ended up doing 4 fellowships in Toronto. And part of the reason for that was that there was still no job, no consultant job back in Ireland, and I was having fun. So I sort of went from fellowship to fellowship, and during that time I got offered a permanent job at the University of Toronto, and so I had to get my training assessed by the Royal College the Royal Canadian College. And that was interesting because I had to get letters from all of the consultants that I'd worked with in Dublin, and fortunately the letters had to be sent to me, and then I had to send them in, because one of the letters was from a guy called Prendeville, who was the senior plastic surgeon in Dublin, who was the greatest asshole I've ever met, and when I said that, when I told people that I was interested in plastic surgery, and I asked them, what should I do? And they said, well, the first thing you have to do is go talk to Prendeville. So I went to talk to Prendeville, and I said, I'm interested in plastic surgery. How would you advise me to go about it? He said, well, look in the back of the BMJ. There are lots of ads in there. And that was how he helped me. And then when he sent me this letter for the Canadian College, the letter said, I think this guy worked with me once, but I'm not sure. I don't remember him. That was the letter, which of course I didn't send in. And then all of the other letters from all the other consultants were fantastic, with dates and times and all sorts of things. And so then I accepted the job in the University of Toronto, and then the Ministry of Health in Ontario said, you don't have any immigration status in Canada. So if you want to stay here, you have to go to an underserviced area. And so I went to a place called Sudbury, which is about 200 miles north of Toronto. And I worked there as an underserviced, in plastic surgery, but it was an underserviced area. And during the time I was there, one of my buddies in Toronto had a patient who worked for the immigration department, and he was telling him about this, and the guy said, don't worry, here, I'll give you the forms, fill them out, just give them to me, I'll make sure this guy gets back to Toronto. And so he did, and those forms ended up on the desk of the guy who ran the underserviced program. And so I got a phone call one day from Immigration Canada saying, it's come to our notice that you've applied for immigration and a job in Toronto. I'm just calling you to let you know that we're changing your work permit to a visitor's visa, and that'll give you 2 weeks to pack up, sell up, and get the hell out of our country. So that wasn't very pleasant. And fortunately, my wife was working in an oncology unit in the underserviced area, and her boss spoke to the local MP, who raised a question in the House as to why they were deporting an oncology physician from an underserviced area. So the whole thing got rescinded, and we got to stay. And then I moved back to Toronto. And
so how long were you out there for? Sorry,
almost 5 years.
Oh wow!
And one of my other great mentors was the guy who got me back to Toronto. He was the chief in Toronto when I went there as a fellow. His name was W.K. Lindsay, and he the chief in Toronto, Ralph Manchello, had talked to me about coming back to Toronto, and I really wasn't sure whether I wanted to, because life in Sudbury was pretty good, and it was a very nice place to bring up kids and stuff. And then WK, who had retired, he drove up to Sudbury with his wife, and I was out of town at the time, and he took my wife out for dinner, and they had a very nice dinner, and nothing was mentioned about anything until the end of the meal. And Mrs. Lindsay went to the ladies, and then WK said to my wife, "Tell that boy he needs to decide if he wants to live where he works or work where he lives." And that was what he said. And that was the best piece of advice I ever got, because then I decided to go back to Toronto, and then I became chief in Toronto after a year or two. And then in Toronto, there's a time limit on leadership positions, and so you can serve 2 terms of 5 years, and then you have to step down, which is a very good system. And so I had done 10 years as chief in Toronto, and a very good friend of mine, Nick Vedder, whom in Seattle, whom I'd known for years and years. Nick had always said to me, "Why don't you come out to Seattle?" And I'd always said, "No, I'm happy where I am." And so he called me and said, "Come on out to Seattle. You're done with your chief job. Why don't you come out?" And I said, "No, I'm not really interested." And so he said, "Look," he called me back and said, "One of my guys is leaving and we're in a pickle. I know you don't want to come here, but we need to structure a job and get somebody senior to come out here to take over the oncology reconstruction service in one of the hospitals in Seattle." So I said, "Oh, I'll come out and help you." And so I went out and helped him structure a job and told him what he needed to do to attract somebody. And about a month later, he phoned me and said, "So all of the things you suggested, they're all done. Now will you come?" So that's how we decided to go to Seattle, which was also very good, because I was about 55 when I went to Seattle, and I was already very well established. I was already well known, and I was very established in Toronto. And then I went out to Seattle, and it doesn't matter how established you are or how well known you are. The first day you walk into the operating room, you can see the nurses saying, "I wonder what this guy thinks he can do." And it's really good for you, because in Toronto, I was used to, you walk down a corridor and somebody says, "Hi, Dr. Neligan." You don't even know who they are, but they know who you are. And in Seattle, it was completely different. And it took about 2 years before I got the same reaction from people. I'd be walking down the corridor and say, "Hey, Dr. Neligan, how are you doing?" And I wouldn't know who they are. And it's just a sign of being accepted and acknowledged. And so it's very good for you, because it brings you back down to earth, and you have to prove yourself again when you make a big move like that. So it was very good.
We like to ask you a bit about your views on leadership. So you've held lots of different posts, and do you have a certain leadership style, or are there certain things about the way you lead that show what your most valued ways of working are?
I think one of the main things about leadership is that you cannot ask people you're leading to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. I think that's really important, and you have to lead by example. One of the so when I moved to Seattle, for example, I was chief in the University Medical Center, which is where the oncology service was, and my job there was to build up a program, and so one of the rules I set was that if every new person we hired, it had to be a unanimous decision by everybody. If there was one person who didn't like a candidate that we were interviewing, then we wouldn't hire them, even if they were a rocket scientist. And so we ended up with a really collegial team. And we would go into each other's rooms. Like if one guy was working late, I'd go into his room and offer to help him, and vice versa. I think that you can't shove things down people's throats. You have to get consensus, and you have to get buy-in from people. And I think that's really important as a leader. And you have to lead by example, and you can't ask people not to do what you wouldn't do yourself. That's probably it in a nutshell. One of the things that was one of the biggest eye-openers for me in my career was when I was in Toronto. I moved from, I worked in a hospital. I was the director of the burn unit for the city. There was one main burn unit, and I moved from that hospital to the hospital where the main microsurgery unit was, because I always wanted to get back to doing more microsurgery, and I at that time was doing a lot of head and neck surgery. And one day at Rands, one of the neurosurgeons presented a case, and he said, I think this tumor is resectable, but I don't know how I can get access to it. And one of the head and neck surgeons said, I can get you in there, but it's going to leave a hell of a hole. And I was in the audience, so well, I can fill the hole. And the three of us looked at each other and we thought, wow, we can, between us, we can do this that neither one of us by ourselves could do. And so I think one of the really important things is collaboration, and that was one of the things that I didn't like about the US system, was that it tended to be very much a silo system. So, for example, when I was in Toronto, about 70% of my practice was head and neck reconstruction. And when I was moving to Seattle, I met with the head and neck guys and said, look, I don't want to take over head and neck reconstruction, but I still want to do head and neck reconstruction. They said, yeah, no problem. And then I moved there, and they didn't send me one case. And the head of otolaryngology was a guy I knew, a very nice guy. And he and I sat down one day. He said, look, I know you want to do head and neck, but if I get you to do head and neck reconstructions, that's lost revenue for our department. So there was separate departments. It's not a division of surgery, it's a separate department. And so it ended up that ENT did all of their own reconstructions. And I think it's much better when there's much more collaboration between services. And the biggest obstacle to that is money. Because, for example, in Toronto, the way the fee structure was set was that there were separate fees for free flap. For example, there was a vessel preparation fee, there was a flap harvest fee, and there was a flap inset fee. And so we gave the vessel preparation fee to the head and neck surgeons because they did it anyway, because you go up to the head and neck and everything was pristine. And so they actually got more money by getting that fee, and we got the reconstruction that we wouldn't otherwise have got, which at the time they weren't capable of doing anyway. So they've since followed the North American. In North America right now, there are very, very few places where plastic surgery does head and neck reconstruction. It's mostly done by ENT, including all the microsurgery. Wow.
Peter, what would you have been if you hadn't become a plastic surgeon?
I would have been, one of the things I always wanted to be was an architect.
Ah.
Yeah. Or the other thing I wanted to be was an airline pilot.
Okay. Do you fly?
No, I took lessons, and at one time when I was in Sudbury, in that Northern Ontario place, and luckily I wasn't in the plane at the time, but the plane blew an engine, and so the instructor quit, and so I never finished my lessons. one of the other things, when I was in medical school, I was in a band, and we were doing very well. We played a lot of gigs and stuff, and we made some demo discs. We sent them off to various companies in London, and my father at that time made me promise that I would finish medical school. So I did. So that might have been another possibility.
Yeah, because I see on Facebook you do a lot of gigs and stuff still.
Right.
Do you still do?
Yeah.
What kind of genre? You play the guitar and the piano, is that right?
Yeah, my favorite is blues.
Blues.
Yeah.
You don't happen to have your guitar nearby? You can play.
I don't, unfortunately. I mean, I normally have all my guitars here, but they're all right now. They're up in Toronto because we're planning to spend our time up there this summer. So.
Yeah. Well, next time then.
Did you play music in your theatres when you were operating?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And you know, one of the things that I learned early on about playing music is that, and I saw it so many times. If you're going to play music, you have to have a playlist that where there's something for everybody. You know, one of my partners in Seattle was into techno music, and he never got to hear his music because he'd have his techno music on, and the nurses would turn it down. And in my room, they always let my music on full blast because they knew that if they didn't like that song, then the next one they'd probably like. So I had a very eclectic mix of music in my playlist.
And even when there's a local list, would you do that with the patients awake?
Yeah. The ones that used to annoy me, sometimes patients would come in with a tape, you know, a relaxation tape. I want you to play this. You know, drive everybody crazy.
If you were allowed 6 guests from any time, any place for a dinner party, who would they be?
6 guests.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of 6 guests, but part of the thing about putting a dinner party together is you want to make sure that the guests are going to have something in common, are going to be able to converse. So that's difficult because my list of 6 guests might be very different from my list of 6 people I would invite to a dinner party. Mm-hmm. So I mean, 6 people I would like to have, that I would like to have for a conversation that has Paul Tessier, as I mentioned, mm-hmm. Probably Ian Jackson because the guy was funny, he was great. Paul McCartney, Eric Clapton. That's 4.
That's 4. Oh,
I've got 2 more. Okay. Can I have dead people?
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Stevie Ray Vaughan, another blues guitar player.
Oh, right.
And who else? Oh, Bill Gates.
Oh. Okay, and let's say you do get them all together around your table. How would you entertain them?
Well, I think the thing about a dinner party is you don't need to entertain them. If you've invited the proper people, then conversation will just flow. And I don't think with that mix of people, you probably wouldn't have great conversation because you'd have one group talking to themselves and another group talking to themselves. So,
would you cook?
Yeah.
What?
Well, it depends. I mean, I love barbecuing. I do a lot of barbecuing, and since COVID, I've just started doing a lot more cooking, and that's one of the things that I love doing now. Right now, I'm on a Chinese kick, so I'm cooking a lot of Chinese food, and that's a lot of fun. Because I mean, the cooking itself doesn't take long, because you know everything's in the wok, but the preparation is what takes time, and that's so much fun with a glass of wine. But I've also been learning how to cook all sorts of different things like beef stroganoff and, you know, classical dishes and stuff. Yeah.
Can you get good Chinese ingredients in Phoenix?
Fair. In Toronto, you can get amazing Chinese ingredients. Yeah. I mean, Chinese food in Toronto is as good as anywhere. It's good as anywhere in China. There are 3 separate Chinatowns in Toronto.
Yeah, I've got a lot of family out in Toronto. It's mind blowing every time I go there. The sushi is really good as well.
Well, and sushi is really good. Yeah. And the sushi in Seattle was really good. Seafood in Seattle was amazing.
Yeah.
And that I miss here in Phoenix. Actually, Phoenix and Toronto are nothing like Seattle. Seattle was amazing. We used to go down to a place called the Fisherman's Wharf and buy salmon straight off the boats coming down from Alaska. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. And Toronto, of course, was the first place that insulin was ever injected.
Toronto, yeah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Wow, good knowledge.
And the Department of Surgery is in, the offices of the Department of Surgery are in the Banting building.
1921 it was, which is not that long ago, really.
Which is not that long ago. And I mean, the whole story of it is amazing. The fact that you know, Banting ended up getting a Nobel Prize as well as, what's the name of the guy who was head of the lab? MacLeod got it, and Best didn't get one
because he was a medical student.
Yeah, but he did a lot of the work.
I think he did, a big part.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he did a big chunk of the work. Yeah, the whole thing of Nobel Prizes and who gets them and who doesn't is in medicine is fascinating. I can't remember the name of the guy now, but the guy who invented streptomycin, it was a similar story. As to, you know, the guy who invented it actually didn't get it, but the head of the lab got it. You know, I think one of the best pathways to success is to, if you're in a position of hiring people, is to hire people who are better than you are. Because then people say, wow, you know, Neligan hired that guy. That's amazing. That guy's amazing. But it reflects back on you. And I've come across several people who have done the opposite, and they've been afraid to hire people who are better than them. I think that's a big mistake. It's very self-limiting. Yeah.
Can I ask, what is the biggest lesson you've learned from your own mistake?
Oh, that's an easy one, because I had, I was an SHO in general surgery. I got called to the emergency room one night to see a young woman with abdominal pain. And I decided she had an ectopic. So I called the OBGYN people down, and they agreed, and they took her to the operating room. And she had, turned out that she had a volvulus, and she nearly died, and she ended up in the ICU and stuff. And it was just before I was about to do my my fellowship exam, and I decided that's it. I'm quitting. I'm not cut out to be a surgeon. I'm not going to do it. And my boss at the time, he grabbed me one day. You know, a couple of days later, in the operating room, there was a consultant's changing room, and he just grabbed me by my lapel, and he opened the door to the consultant's changing room and shoved me in, and he put me up against a locker, and he said, "Don't you dare quit." And he said, then he went through a list of all the mistakes he had made in his career. And this guy was a big name in Dublin at the time. And it just made me think that, you know, everybody makes mistakes, and it's as long as you learn from them, that's all that matters. And not only learn from them, but tell other people about them so they can learn from them as well. And that's why I always tell people, it's important. People tend to show their best results and, aren't I fantastic? And they don't show their complications. And when people realize that we all have complications, then they pay attention and they learn from those. So that was probably the biggest come to Jesus moment that I had in my career.
How about the best lesson you learned from someone else's mistake?
That's more difficult. Well, there was it's something I haven't thought about for a long time. Again, I was an SHO in general surgery, and we got a young woman in one night with abdominal pain, and the registrar, who wasn't that much more senior than me, took her to the operating room and did a laparotomy and ended up doing a hysterectomy, not recognizing the uterus. And I think it was my second week in the, I just started my SHO, just out of internship. And I was just kind of standing there going, what the hell? And he seemed very confident. And that was a huge lesson to me, to show me that, if you're not sure of something, ask for help, Don't take it all on yourself. Yeah. That was devastating.
What do you think is the importance of emotional intelligence for a surgeon?
Oh, I think it's really important, because I had this experience just the other day. My wife has a lesion at the back of her retina. We went to see a retinal specialist the other day. And the guy came in and was so condescending. And ultimately, when he realized that my wife was a radiation oncologist, he completely changed. And that shouldn't happen. It should be the same for everybody, And I think what a lot of people forget is that when you're talking to somebody about surgery, that's the most important thing that they've had to deal with, maybe ever. But certainly for now, it's the most important thing they have to deal with. And I think you have to be very sympathetic to that. And I think you need to read signs and realize when somebody's scared or when somebody needs more information. You need to spend time with patients, I think, if you're to pick up on all of these things. And I think it's also important, in dealing with other staff. The whole atmosphere has changed over my career, and it's gone from a very chauvinistic, male-dominated, almost militaristic kind of system to something that is getting there, but it still has a long way to go. And I'm always amazed, for example, looking at some of our female residents. They sometimes have a tougher time in the operating room than the male residents, and they don't always have that tough time because the surgeon they're working with is an asshole. They often have that tough time because the nurses treat them really badly. And the young, handsome resident who asks for a retractor gets handed it right away. And the maybe much more competent female resident who asks for something just has to stand there and help herself from the table. I've seen that so many times. Mm. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. Really
good fun to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. It's
nice to talk to you both.
It's really, it's so great to speak to someone who is a human being first, and then a doctor and a plastic surgeon. It's a bit like the I read this thing from Pablo Casals, the great cellist, who said he was a human being first, a musician second, and a cellist third. And it's quite, you know, often we meet plastic surgeons whose identity is plastic surgery first and foremost, but speaking to you, you're much more of a person.
There's a lot of ego out there.
Yeah.
I always tell people I'm just the same as everybody else. I put my trousers on one leg at a time.
Lovely. Okay.
All right. Take care, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that, like the clip.
And subscribe to the Stoke Mandeville Plastics channel.
See you next time.